Robert's rebellion. Christopher looked up from the reports as he heard his cousin's voice from the entrance. Robin closed the door to his solo before settling into the chair opposite Christopher. "I've received some concerning news from one of the girls," the dirty blonde man said, his expression serious. Christopher sighed inwardly. He had just settled in for the morning. "Oh?" He leaned back in his chair, giving his cousin his full attention. "Prince Rhaegar was seen early this morning leaving the city in great haste, escorted only by Sir Oswell Went and Sir Arthur Dane," Robin informed him. Christopher maintained his composure outwardly, aware of the need for caution in their discussions. Internally, annoyance surged at the prince. Rhaegar, whom he had once respected as a seemingly perfect prince destined to be a good king, had proven less ideal the longer Christopher knew the Silver Prince. In the rough span since becoming lieutenant, Christopher had steadily crafted a small yet robust power base around him and his family. Captain Ronald, growing increasingly weary and apathetic, seemed convinced that each day could be his last, uncertain whether the threat loomed over his position or life itself. As a result, he had shifted the majority of his responsibilities onto Christopher, effectively making him the acting captain of the Gate of the Gods. This transition hadn't escaped notice. With Adam serving as Captain Ronald's other lieutenant, the two acted swiftly to populate the ranks under Captain Ronald with loyal men. These recruits owed their ranks or positions in the Gold Cloaks to Christopher's influence, further solidifying his grip on the operations within the barracks. This blatant power grab, while noticeable to those who cared, felt necessary in Christopher's eyes. The current commander of the Gold Cloaks didn't seem keen on rewarding competence, relying instead on connections and favors to friends. After 8 moons of observing the commander's consistent favoritism and lack of sound decision-making, Christopher doubted any shift toward more intelligent choices. "Thanks, Robin. We'll just have to see what our dear prince has decided to do now. It's not something we can control. Meanwhile, I want you to see if your girls can keep tabs on the newly appointed captains by Commander Merryweather and the commander himself," Christopher ordered. He continued, "I know it's a long shot, as the Hand will likely dismiss anything minor and try to bury anything substantial. Still, give it a shot. It might be our only chance to have something in case." Robin nodded seriously. "I will keep you informed of any developments in the city, especially around the prince. Unfortunately, my reach outside of King's Landing is still limited to what travelers and lords learn from ravens." Christopher nodded, and Robin soon departed, leaving Christopher to return to the administrative work of a captain. The downside of having informants only within the city was that they learned information at the same time as the rest of the city. It was an unfortunate reality. 2 weeks later, Captain Ronald Penrose was found dead in his quarters. The investigation concluded it to be of natural causes. Christopher didn't delve much into it, as the manner of his death mattered little, whether smothered or passing in his sleep. Christopher had naively held out hope for a natural ascension to captaincy. This hope was shattered the day after Captain Ronald's death when the men of the West Barracks were introduced to Sir Gerald Hastwick, the son of Lord Owen Merryweather's vassal, Lord Hastwick. What a coincidence! The new captain harbored unrealistic expectations, inquiring about the Gold Cloaks cavalry as if it were a private army. Christopher, instead, handed him 2 hefty stacks of administrative papers and reports, a deliberate and petty act to deliver a harsh reality check. Introducing himself and Adam as Captain Gerald's lieutenants, Christopher falsely claimed he was needed for other business and excused himself. In truth, he should have assisted the new captain in familiarizing himself, but Christopher harbored doubts about Captain Gerald's longevity in the role. Robin's reports suggested the Hand's growing unpopularity with the king might lead to his dismissal. With Lord Merryweather's influenced appointments likely to follow suit, Christopher anticipated changes on the horizon. As he passed through the Gold Cloaks, their silent and subtle pats on his back spoke volumes. Intent on visiting his guards at their inn, Christopher noticed a gold cloak rushing from the Gate of the Gods. "Lieutenant!" the man called out, prompting Christopher to approach with trepidation, wondering what urgent matter this man brought. His haste suggested something significant, perhaps even an army at the gates. Yes? Report, Christopher replied as the watchman nearly skidded to a stop in front of him. Sir, Lord Brandon Stark and a few other lordlings are outside the gates, demanding the arrest of Prince Rhaegar for the kidnapping of Lord Brandon's lady sister, Lyanna. How should we respond to this lunacy? The guard explained almost helplessly. Christopher felt his jaw drop. What in the Seven Kingdoms could the prince be thinking? Was he utterly out of his mind? Kidnapping the daughter of a Lord Paramount, whose heir was betrothed to another Lord Paramount and virtually allied with another? Christopher had no doubts that something along those lines had happened. The Starks may not be politically adept, but they wouldn't fabricate something like this. Almost a minute passed as Christopher grappled with disbelief. The guard mirrored his stupefaction, eventually appearing confused about what to do. Sir? What should we do? The guard repeated, snapping Christopher out of his near-trance state. We will get back to the barracks. You will saddle my horse and 4 others, and then we shall send a message to the Red Keep about this. The man saluted as he rushed to action, running back to where Christopher had only just left. Christopher followed at a slower pace. Doubts about his whole presence in King's Landing were growing. What if this escalated into a rebellion? Would Christopher stay? Now was not the time for such a momentous decision, to abandon all he had built here. The influence and power he wielded would be hard to replicate elsewhere. He lacked the influence or connections to receive a lordship, the only way to eclipse his current standing. No, this decision could wait until after dealing with Stark. His mount was saddled as he returned to the courtyard. Christopher was disheartened to see Captain Gerald mounted and trying to direct things. Yet, he was pleased to see every man turn to him as he climbed onto his mount, all the guardsmen looking in anticipation at what he would order. Send a rider to the Red Keep with all the current information. 4 men will follow me to the gatehouse, where we will contact Lord Brandon and see how the situation evolves from there. Do you concur, Captain? Christopher finished with a completely professional expression toward the overwhelmed man. He enjoyed seeing the previously cocky and confident knight squirm. Sounds reasonable, continue as you were, Lieutenant. Christopher swore he heard a few snickers but ignored them as he selected 4 additional riders to accompany him. Christopher and Sir Gerald were soon at the head of the mounted gold cloaks. They were silent as they rode through the square and into the street leading to the gate. Soon, Hastwick leaned in a little closer. I believe it will be important to show a strong front. To be firm and not let them believe that they can just threaten with violence. While that may work in their lands and with people such as them, they need to learn that they cannot do such things in a civilized society. Do you agree, Sir Christopher? Christopher fixed him with a deadpan look. It shouldn't surprise him that some minor reach lordling would be so ignorant, but it still did. Even the small folk of Sow's Horn were aware that the Northmen were not wildlings. It seemed like Sir Gerald had mixed the two. I think I will handle the talking, Captain. You need not concern yourself. Sir Gerald fell silent, and the ride to the massive wall of King's Landing and gatehouse grew blissfully quiet. Lieutenant, one of the gold cloaks saluted as he approached. Sir? The watchman then seemed to notice Sir Gerald with his black officer armor and 4 golden stripes designating him captain. Our new captain, Sir Gerald Hastwick. Christopher quickly introduced his superior before turning his attention to the open portcullis and the wall of gold cloaks barring entry to a group of 5 armored riders standing impatiently outside the gate. Christopher easily recognized the tall form of Lord Brandon with shining plate armor and furs on his broad shoulders, the very picture of a northern lord. Though even from this distance, Christopher could see the furious expression that graced his face. Captain, the man saluted before turning to Christopher again, blatantly seeking his directions. It was almost comical how fast his men dismissed the Reach Knight, their commanding officer. How should we proceed, Lieutenant? Do we apprehend them? They have threatened the prince's life repeatedly and brutally. Surely, it constitutes treason at the very least, the man suggested. Christopher shook his head. Let me talk to them and attempt to make some sense of this mess. The gold cloaks made way for him and his mounted men as they moved past. Brandon seemed to recognize him almost immediately, and almost all his anger turned to confusion. "Christopher? What are you doing here?" the Stark heir asked him. The Stark's companions, all of whom had been at Harrenhal, soon followed their leader with equally surprised looks as they recognized Christopher. Some, however, wore angry expressions. Christopher identified the sandy blonde Sir Elbert Arryn, heir of the Vale, the curly brown hair of Sir Geoffrey Mallister, blonde Kyle Royce, and a red-headed Glover, judging by the last man's fisted gauntlet on his surcoat. His gold cloaks, meanwhile, looked perplexed, trying to make sense of the fact that the son of the Lord of the North knew their lieutenant on a first-name basis. Sir Gerald, especially, appeared as if he had sucked a lemon, realizing his subordinate seemed more connected than him, an heir to a lordship, even if it was a small holding not even a direct vassal of the Tyrrells, was overshadowed by a lowborn. "Brandon, it is nice to see you again even in these circumstances," Christopher replied respectfully. "I am the lieutenant of this city gate and have heard reports of threats, abductions, and treasonous behavior. I would appreciate hearing your side of this situation," Christopher stated professionally. This seemed to remind Brandon of the situation as anger quickly reappeared. "My sister has been abducted by Prince Rhaegar, and I demand her return in my father's name," the Northman demanded. Christopher raised his hands placatingly as the gold cloaks raised spears and Brandon's followers drew their weapons. "Calm down, lower your weapons, everyone." Christopher's gold cloaks lowered their spears again, but Brandon's followers did not. Christopher somehow did not doubt Brandon's claims. After the last day of jousting, this did not seem impossible, although with how Lyanna looked at Rhaegar and her betrothed Robert Baratheon, he wondered how unwilling she was. But that was not his place to speculate, and neither was speaking treason of the prince. He only hoped that Brandon would see sense and approach this more diplomatically. "I am afraid that any slander of Prince Rhaegar is treason, so refrain from doing so." Christopher threw out a chance for them to save themselves from lawful imprisonment, but they did not take up his generous offer. "That cur has overstepped any rights he has as prince of the realm. He has abducted the daughter of one of his lord paramounts, and I am certain that my uncle will not let this injustice go on," the Arryn heir exclaimed, and Christopher could feel his grip on the situation falter. "Why do you even suspect that this has occurred? Did you witness this yourself, or has it all been an unfortunate misunderstanding?" Christopher made a last-ditch attempt to salvage this situation for Brandon. They were no friends, more like acquaintances, but Christopher would be the first to admit that King Aerys was quite arbitrary in his punishments. Doing something unexpected and idiotic was almost the more predictable path for their monarch. Christopher did not wish for the Northmen to be imprisoned or, gods forbid, executed. "Misunderstanding?" the Glover man exclaimed in rage and disbelief. Brandon, however, managed to interrupt his fellow Northman before he could continue. "We are positive that this happened, as Lyanna disappeared a few leagues from Harrenhal and was last seen with a silver-headed man with purple eyes and 2 white-clad knights. None mentioned any specific names, of course, but we all know who matches the description exactly. Do I really need to spell it out?" Brandon explained with frustration. Christopher did agree that it was quite obvious who it was. It matched exactly to what he had heard when Prince Rhaegar had left a short fortnight ago. As Christopher was about to reply, a booming voice interrupted him from behind, along with the sound of approaching horses. "Lord Brandon Stark and your companions are under arrest for treason in the name of His Grace King Aerys Targaryen II of his name." Christopher turned swiftly to witness Lord Commander Gerald Hightower advancing with more than a dozen Targaryen guards. In proximity, close to 100 gold cloaks followed, shadowing the young visage of Commander Arnel Merryweather. Christopher knew now that it was too late and quickly moved to a side. Maybe he could try to help Brandon once imprisoned, but for now, he was helpless. Almost as helpless as Brandon and his 4 companions, they first moved into a circle with their backs to one another as they were surrounded by the gold cloaks under the commander and approached by the Kingsguard. They soon realized the futility of resisting and were promptly put in chains, then loaded into a cart bound for the Red Keep. The Kingsguard Lord Commander and his Targaryen men-at-arms departed, escorting the cart. However, Commander Merryweather stayed behind, his gaze first drifting to Captain Hastwick before settling on Christopher. "You, sir, what rank in my gold cloaks do you hold?" Christopher barely resisted gesturing to his visible 2 gold discs, recognizable to the commander of the gold cloaks as those of a lieutenant, but apparently not to the man who had never served in the lower ranks. "I am a lieutenant, Commander," Christopher replied. The commander, with a youthful appearance that couldn't be older than 20, nodded contemplatively, dark eyes sizing Christopher up. "Why weren't these lordlings already apprehended when we arrived, Lieutenant?" "I have heard lots about you, Sir Christopher," the man said, testing his name. "So what has changed? Allowing these traitors to continue to insult and threaten the Crown Prince is not something I would have expected of one of my lieutenants." Anger surged within Christopher as the commander's voice grew almost mocking. Before he could reply, one of his men from the barracks spoke up. "Do not question the lieutenant's integrity, Commander. He has achieved more here than you have in your life." A crowd had gathered around the 3 officers, consisting of men from the West Barracks and those from the Red Keep Barracks that had arrived with the commander. Christopher's men murmured in agreement, while the Red Keep gold cloaks looked conflicted, their gazes shifting between Christopher and Sir Arnel. The aforementioned commander grew a furious shade of red and pointed an accusatory finger at the watchman. 30 lashes. 30 lashes for this disrespect of a commanding officer. I have never witnessed such insolence." Sir Arnel shouted in some disbelief. The watchman turned to Christopher, ignoring the commander's ruling. The man bore a determined look on his face as he awaited Christopher's decision. Deeply touched by the watchman's loyalty and willingness to defend him, even at the cost of punishment, Christopher made his decision. It was evident that such loyalty was not easily earned or dismissed. As some of Merryweather's men moved toward Christopher's defender, the knight's decision became clear. He jumped off his mount and moved in between the Red Keep gold cloaks and his watchman. "I shall bear the lashes. I am obviously the cause, and for that, I will endure the consequence," Christopher stated, purposefully vague about whether he blamed the watchman for the incident. Sir Arnel looked shocked before growing triumphant, believing he had won this little game. However, when Christopher glanced at the now clearly conflicted men standing behind the commander, with expressions ranging from respect to surprise, he knew that the Reach Knight was mistaken. This act of sacrifice would spread throughout all 3 barracks, and word would circulate despite the commander's attempts to control it. Christopher understood that he needed to survive this lashing, which would prove easier said than done, as he had never experienced the cruel punishment before. Some playful whipping between him and Adam as children that he still remembered of course, but never 30 whole lashes directly on the skin. Yet, amidst this daunting experience, a glimmer of hope emerged. It could potentially forge an unshakable bond with his men in the barracks. The incident seemed to be elevating his reputation, not just within his immediate circle but also earning respect elsewhere. This sacrifice, though challenging, was transforming into a stepping stone for Christopher's journey toward the commander's position, a possibility on the horizon. "Then we shall complete them immediately. Sir Gerald, is there a posting and whip in your barracks?" Sir Arnel asked with a tinge of excitement in his voice, only to grow annoyed as the captain turned to Christopher for a moment. Merryweather's eyes narrowed as Christopher nodded to Sir Gerald. "Yes, Commander." There was absolute silence in the crowd as Christopher's men appeared incensed by his treatment, and Sir Arnel's men wore sour and dark expressions, some glancing at Christopher with sympathy. The commander displayed an irritated look on his face before turning to the Red Keep gold cloaks. "Escort him up to the West Barracks. There's clearly a culture of disrespect toward authority breeding in these lower barracks." A couple of men hesitantly followed the orders. They paused briefly as Christopher's men made to step forward, but he waved off the watchman. "I've given my word and won't break it now. Let them escort me," Christopher declared, his tone resonating with an almost painfully honorable facade that masked his opportunistic and ruthless ambitions. The gold cloaks ordered to accompany him looked apologetic as they formed a protective circle, ensuring not to lay a hand on him during the lengthy walk back to the barracks. His gold cloaks followed immediately behind him, with Commander Arnell and Captain Gerald leading the procession. Christopher walked the street with his head held high, sporting an inscrutable expression as small folk observed with a mix of curiosity and confusion, witnessing him being escorted past. As they walked, Christopher was left in his thoughts. Once again, the idea of fleeing the city crossed his mind. Imprisoning the son of the Lord of the North could potentially spark a rebellion, given Lord Stark's formidable alliance network. King Aerys seemed destined to invite unrest, and if the North, Vale, and Stormlands joined forces in rebellion, the Reach alone could determine the outcome of such a conflict. The Reach's involvement could either separate the theaters of war or pose an extreme threat if they aligned. This consideration didn't even account for other potential players. If Lord Tywin sought revenge for past insults, if Lord Hoster Tully grew greedy for rebellion, or if Dorne chose to stay uninvolved despite Princess Elia's presence in King's Landing, though the latter seemed unlikely given the well-known fierce loyalty her brothers had for their sister. Abandoning the king and then returning if they emerged victorious would be just as catastrophic as the potential rebels winning. Christopher had carefully built something here, and his contributions to the Targaryen cause, especially recognized by Prince Rhaegar if not by King Aerys, could undoubtedly yield substantial rewards. However, the looming question was how many more years the Mad King had left. This rebellion might very well mark the end of King Aerys, and Christopher had to weigh his options carefully in this turbulent situation. Someone had obviously been sent in advance, as when Christopher was escorted into the now familiar courtyard, a wooden post had already been set up with ropes hanging ominously from it. His guards almost reluctantly removed his black chest plate, fastened his hands with the ropes to the pole, and raised his undertunic, exposing his bare back to the pleasant sun and wind. Positioned on his knees in the sandy courtyard, his back bent, Christopher awaited the impending punishment. Lieutenant Mudd has let his men's mouths run amok, and for this, he will be punished with 30 lashes of a whip, Commander Merryweather declared with a spiteful tone behind him. Christopher noticed how the knight conveniently omitted the fact that he had volunteered for this in place of one of his men. It was a feeble attempt to control the narrative, but the correct information had undoubtedly circulated twice over in the crowded courtyard. As the cracking sound of the whip echoed, Christopher remained resolute, not flinching. Though he had seen the 5-tailed leather whips used for punishment, and they didn't look overly intimidating, a small feeling of trepidation crept over him at the sound. He heard the man, presumably the one designated for the punishment, walk up behind him. A sergeant, undoubtedly from the Red Keep barracks, would carry out this unpleasant task. Christopher contemplated the identity of his punisher, clenching his teeth when he heard the ominous whoosh of the whip behind him. The first second was almost unbearable as his back was engulfed in a searing pain. He grunted, barely managing to stifle the scream. It was a furious pain that, thankfully, seemed to dissipate quickly. However, he did not have much time to recover, as the whip snapped again and again against his back. The relentless lashes continued, each one leaving its fiery mark on his skin. Christopher endured in silence, determined not to give his tormentor the satisfaction of hearing him scream. As the punishment persisted, the courtyard remained eerily quiet, the onlookers hushed in a mixture of shock and sympathy, witnessing the severe consequences of defiance. Christopher's scream pierced the air at the 7th lashing, the sound echoing through the courtyard. He could feel the warm, sticky trail of blood coursing down his back, a grim testament to the relentless punishment. Despite his best efforts, he managed to stifle the following scream of pain at the 8th and 9th lashing. However, the facade of strength soon crumbled as any coherent thoughts were shattered by the vicious leather tails of the whip. Each strike brought an agonizing surge of pain, blurring his senses and leaving him gasping for breath. He rapidly lost track of the punishing blows, his entire existence reduced to the relentless rhythm of each strike. Despite the excruciating pain that surged through his back, he remained on his knees, trapped in a world dominated by the repetitive onslaught of the whip. Abruptly, the torment ceased, leaving him disoriented and barely coherent. Gradually, the constraints binding his arms were loosened, and two heavily armored figures hoisted him upright between them. The transition from the vicious whipping to this unexpected rescue blurred his senses. As they carried him into the barracks, the overwhelming agony and exhaustion plunged him into unconsciousness, his battered body surrendering to the respite. As Christopher stirred from his unconscious state, the sharp jolt of pain served as a harsh reminder of his injuries when he attempted to shift in the bed. Though he initially lay on his side, the instinct to roll onto his back was quickly abandoned with a stifled grunt. As his eyes scanned the infirmary within the barracks, the half-master, dedicated to tending to the men of the West Barracks, had his back turned. However, at the sound of Christopher's pained grunt, he swiveled around to face him, acknowledging the awakening with a measured gaze. Christopher heard shuffling behind him, and soon, Adam and Robin came into view. "That was idiotic. You've been out for close to 3 days now," Adam stated bluntly, his gaze sweeping from Christopher to the visible evidence of his injuries. Christopher responded with a weak smile. "I don't disagree, especially now, but it was meant to send a message." Robin, a mix of admiration and concern in his eyes, chimed in. "Send a message, you did. The sergeant responsible for your punishment was found dead at the bottom of some stairs in the Red Keep barracks with all his limbs broken yesterday." Christopher managed to raise an eyebrow. The sergeant had been a faceless figure to him, someone he had never seen. While he harbored a desire for retribution against the one who had lashed him, Christopher didn't care for the specific identity. "It seems to be a most unfortunate fall, and one that was not influenced by any of us," Adam added. "We did keep eyes on him, but this appears to be an internal matter within the sergeant's own barracks. You evidently earned some sympathy from a few of the Red Keep watchmen," Adam admitted with a hint of reluctance. Christopher's kin shared more information, reintroducing him to the situation in King's Landing. "Commander Arnold is struggling to maintain control, facing dissent from gold cloaks across all 3 barracks. None of them faced punishment as severe as yours," Christopher's cousin informed him. It became a topic in a small council meeting, overshadowed, however, by Lord Brandon's imprisonment in the Black Cells. "The king is summoning the fathers of Brandon and his companions to present themselves at King's Landing. Only Lord Rickard Stark has answered, stating he will travel down via White Harbour, arriving in a moon," Robin added. Christopher absorbed this information when Adam interrupted with a stern expression. "You won't witness this, as Burton here has determined that you won't recover within a moon. Guards are posted at the door to protect you. Be compliant," Adam demanded, gesturing to the half-master before saluting and departing. Robin sent Christopher a last look before leaving. In the following weeks, Christopher drifted between sleep and wakefulness. Robin and Adam visited regularly, checking on his progress. Fortunately, Burton found no signs of infection, a stroke of luck that spared Christopher additional complications. Christopher was kept informed about the outside world by Robin. He learned of King Aerys' fury and the anticipation of Lord Stark's arrival. Details of the grim conditions in the Black Cells, situated even lower than the Red Keep's normal dungeons, were shared. Prince Rhaegar and Lady Lyanna remained absent, and the prevailing belief in King's Landing was that their situation was a result of a forbidden romance. However, Christopher discovered that this perception differed in the other kingdoms. Robert Baratheon claimed that Lyanna had been abducted and subjected to unspeakable horrors 100 times over. Christopher had only last week managed to walk slowly with minimal pain and rest carefully on his back when Robin rushed in with a panicked expression. It had now been a moon since his flogging and he had barely ventured outside the quarters of the half-master. "Lord Stark and his heir have been executed in a trial by combat," Robin shouted. Christopher's eyebrows furrowed. Executed? Surely they had been killed in a trial by combat? Still, he waited for Robin to continue, a sinking feeling gnawing at the pit of his stomach. "King Aerys named his champion for the trial, Fire." Robin's voice trembled with shock as he relayed the horrifying details. "Lord Stark burnt in his armor, flames burnt him alive, while Lord Brandon had a cord around his neck that tightened as he moved with a sword just out of reach and suffocated to death. Christopher was stunned by the brutality, but the execution of the Starks seemed almost characteristic of their king. The Targaryen who once had been such a promising monarch after the passing of his father and ascension as king only grew more unstable day by day. King Aerys could not survive this war regardless of the outcome. "Has there been any response?" Christopher eventually asked Robin, who shook his head. King Aerys sent a letter to Lord Jon Arryn, ordering the execution of Lord Arryn's 2 wards, Lord Baratheon and the new Lord Stark. "Well, that isn't happening," Christopher replied swiftly. "We shall prepare for war." Robin wore an unsure expression. "Who will we fight for? The rebels?" Christopher locked eyes with Robin. "Where we can gain the most, loyalist or rebel, I don't care. As long as I end up with a lordship. This war is the perfect opportunity to catapult our family up, and I won't achieve that by playing it safe," Christopher explained firmly. Robin eventually nodded, a bit more assured. "Do look into where we may go and how to leave the city, just in case," Christopher instructed. "Certainly, Christopher. I'll look into it immediately," Robin nodded before leaving Christopher to his own worrying thoughts. In a matter of days, Christopher caught wind of Lord Arryn's outright refusal, swiftly followed by the calling of banners from both the king and the rebel faction. The dissenting lords at present were Lord Stark, Lord Arryn, and Lord Baratheon. Lord Arryn's vassal, Lord Mark Grafton, remained loyal to the crown. He had promptly informed the king of his intent to prevent Lord Robert from returning to his lands across the sea. The unity of the Stormlands under their liege lord was also fragmented. Lords Fell, Grandison, Catherine, and John Connington aligned themselves with the crown, creating a schism within the region. Thus began the rebellion that Christopher hoped to exploit for his gain, with him confined to the infirmary of a gold cloak barracks, nearly bedridden. Lord John Connington adjusted the gleaming pin on his red and white surcoat, proudly displaying the griffin sigil of his house. The past week had felt like a nightmare, with chaos reigning from the Stark family's untimely demise to the outbreak of rebellion, all worsened by the absence of his Silver Prince who was in Dawn with a Stark bell. Amidst the turmoil, the removal of Lord Owen Merryweather as hand for failing to quell the rebellion offered a small sense of relief. Jon was elated to be appointed Hand of the King, even if it wasn't for the Targaryen he wished for. Maybe, from this position, he could pave the way for his prince's rise to power. Contrary to the ineffective Lord Owen Merryweather, whose legacy consisted of misguided attempts to build a power base, Jon was aware of the significant influence the Hand held as the second most powerful figure in the kingdoms. His immediate focus, however, was on undoing the repercussions of Merryweather's actions in the capital. Fortunately, the damage wasn't widespread, mainly confined to King's Landing. Lord Owen's misguided emphasis, particularly on the gold cloaks, had left them a mere shadow of their former selves in just a short time under Merryweather's rule. His Silver Prince had tasked Jon to keep a vigilant eye on Sir Christopher Mudd. Though unimpressed by the man's cousin, Jon couldn't deny Sir Christopher's confidence and ambition, traits not uncommon among knights of his station. In these times of war, such matters often found their own resolution. Overconfident knights with big dreams often found themselves in precarious situations all on their own. What Jon had heard concerning a flogging gave him pause. Though crude, the stunt had yielded impressive results. To endure a whip for his own subordinates' actions was a masterful ploy. Lifelong loyalty had been made for far less. Jon was keenly aware of the fate of the man who wielded the whip. Even with Tricifer bedridden from the experience. Without Jon's intervention, Commander Merryweather might have followed. A contingent of Connington men stationed at the Red Keep barracks ensured otherwise. Despite harboring personal disdain for the commander, Jon recognized the gravity of the situation. As the Hand of the King during wartime, any hint of insurrection or the assassination of the City Watch's commander was utterly unacceptable. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. At his prompt, the door creaked open slowly, revealing the very subject of his contemplation. It seemed the knight had accepted his summons. "Commander of the City Watch, Sir Arnold Merryweather entered the room. He was the grandson of the man whose seat John now sat, a fact that only served to underscore the nepotism evident in his appointment. Recent events had highlighted Sir Arnold's incompetence and lack of experience all too vividly. Despite being only a few name days younger than John, Sir Arnold still bore traces of boyhood, whereas John exuded a sense of maturity. In contrast, Sir Arnold possessed an inflated ego that matched his inexperience. While he may have refrained from displaying such arrogance to his superiors like John, the young knight's treatment of those he deemed beneath him did not escape notice. "My Lord Hand," Sir Arnold greeted John with a simpering smile, prompting a barely concealed grimace from John. He despised lickspittles and cretins like Sir Arnold, who reminded him of the king's most ardent supporters. These individuals, driven by greed and lacking in intellect, managed to escape consequences solely through their fawning loyalty to the king, a trait John found both repugnant and perplexing. Lord Quentin Chelsted and Lord Simon Staunton came to mind as prime examples, their antagonism on the small council evident from the outset. "Commander Arnold," John replied after a moment, gesturing to the chair opposite his desk. As Sir Arnold sat down, fidgeting nervously, John continued, "I appreciate your prompt arrival." Sir Arnold nodded eagerly at the supposed compliment, oblivious to the fact that John had only just dispatched a messenger to summon him for their conversation. "I will always heed the command of the Hand, my Lord Hand. So nothing has changed then?" John thought to himself. He was certain that Sir Arnold was well acquainted with the Tower of the Hand from Lord Owen's tenure, which ended with the Reach Lord's exile and loss of titles. It was apparent that Sir Arnold had gone unnoticed by the King's small inquisition of the Merryweathers in King's Landing, a fact that seemed to matter little to the increasingly reclusive king. The Queen's seemingly lighter disposition, in contrast, hinted at more than just a lack of interaction with her husband. It whispered of her sorrow, a whispered secret well known throughout the corridors of King's Landing. Less widely acknowledged was Queen Riella's palpable distaste for her brother-husband. John allowed his thoughts on the king to fade away as he redirected his focus to the Merryweather knight before him. "As is your duty," John stated firmly. "Nevertheless, I did want to discuss the state of the city watch." Sir Arnold's smile vanished, replaced by a mix of nervousness and irritation. It was no surprise, though John had no intention of relieving the commander of his post just yet. That time would come when Sir Arnold had exhausted his limited usefulness. Lord Varys, always the informant, had suggested using Sir Arnold to maneuver for Sir Christopher Mudd's promotions, potentially paving the way for the young knight to assume the role of commander if he proved reliable. Isolated and without allies, facing a potential mutiny, and lacking in competence, Sir Arnold was ripe for manipulation. John wagered that the Merryweather knight would sacrifice much in his desperation to avoid facing the consequences of his actions, or at least to appear to do so. "I've received reports concerning numerous new and unprepared captains, ill-equipped for their roles and duties. In particular, I wish to discuss Sir Gerald Hastwick, the captain of the Gate of the Gods," John stated, his tone laden with gravity as he addressed the young commander. Initially, Sir Arnold appeared perplexed, but realization dawned upon him as the gravity of John's intent became clear. Aye. Sir Gerald is a good friend, and I believe, given time to familiarize himself with his responsibilities, he could serve admirably," Sir Arnold stuttered, his voice tinged with desperation. John shook his head in disapproval. "We are at war, sir. The luxury of time for acclimation for the capital's garrison officers is a luxury we cannot afford. This is why I am considering appointing a replacement from among the more experienced lower-ranked officers. He's a low-born schemer, plotting against my life." Sir Arnold burst out, his voice rising in agitation. It was clear they both understood to whom John was referring, and it seemed Sir Christopher had left a significant, albeit unfavorable, impression on Sir Arnold as well. "His followers have already slain one of my men and are plotting a mutiny against me." John was somewhat taken aback that the often inept Reacher knight had managed to grasp the undercurrents among his men. Yet, he had no intention of letting Sir Arnold believe they were entering some kind of partnership. "My mind's made up, and nothing you say will change it. So, don't bother," John stated plainly, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. Sir Arnold's expression shifted from shock to a sense of betrayal, but he remained silent as John continued. Sir Christopher Mudd is taking over as captain of the Gate of the Gods. I won't tolerate any attempts to undermine him. Remember, you're still commander by my leave alone. Step out of line, and I'll have no qualms about handing you over to the king's judgment. John watched as the young knight clenched his jaw, anger evident in his quick, tight swallow, before he abruptly stood and offered a curt, frustrated nod. John had no illusions about the knight's potential for stirring trouble, yet it was crucial for the City Watch's stability that Sir Christopher be properly integrated and ascend the ranks. A captain who commanded respect was far more suited to eventually take on the role of commander than a lieutenant whose name was only somewhat familiar. You're dismissed, John said plainly, his voice brooking no argument. Sir Arnold paused momentarily, perhaps searching for some argument or plea that could alter his fate, but finding none. Then, as if snapping out of a reverie, he turned sharply and made his swift exit from the room. John sighed wearily, his attention shifting back to the scattered missives on his desk, each one bearing news of the conflict. Among them, the report of Gulltown's fall and Lord Mark Grafton's demise at the hands of Robert Baratheon stood out starkly. While John could respect Lord Robert's martial skills and prowess on the battlefield, he had long held reservations about the man's capabilities as a lord. Yet, if there was any realm that could withstand being governed by such a singularly focused Lord Paramount, it was the Stormlands. His fellow Stormlords, for all their might and loyalty, often lacked in subtlety and refinement. This turn of events, though regrettable, was hardly unexpected. It effectively unified the Vale under the Arryn standard once more, providing Lord Robert with the opportunity to journey to the Stormlands and muster support for the rebel cause among their countrymen. Lord Mace Tyrell had fortuitously decided to stay loyal, and the raven that John had received only this morning had been very welcome. The Tyrrells had called their banners and all of their vassals had followed, uncommon with split loyalties in the Stormlands, Vale, and of course Riverlands. Truly without the Reach then this rebellion would have been lost already. The silence from the Iron Islands and the Westerlands was unsettling. Their apparent neutrality, coupled with an uptick in raids along the western coastline of Westeros, suggested a lurking opportunism rather than outright support for either side. Dorne's allegiance, while secured in the name of the king, was undoubtedly coerced by the presence of Princess Elia, her children, and Prince Lewin Martell in King's Landing, hostages in all but name. John's strategy aimed at exploiting the rebels' divided fronts, particularly isolating the Stormlands to dismantle the rebellion piece by piece. With the numerical superiority of the Loyalist forces, there was a tangible path to victory, one that necessitated swift and decisive action to prevent any potential regrouping of the rebel factions. Yet, amid the calculations and planning, John's thoughts frequently drifted to Prince Rhaegar. The Silver Prince's return was eagerly anticipated, for his leadership would undoubtedly invigorate the Loyalist cause and provide a much-needed boost to morale. Until such time, the weight of command rested on John's shoulders, a burden he accepted with grim determination. Failure was not an option, not just for the sake of the realm, but to honor the trust placed in him by his prince, Commander of Gold. The title of Lord Eddard Stark of Winterfell ignited a cold fury within him, coupled with a profound sense of shame. It was an honor he should never have had to assume. By rights, he might have been lord of a lesser holdfast like the Stony Shore or Moat Cailin, but never the Warden of the North. Yet, fate, twisted by the Targaryens since the Eloman tourney at Harrenhal, seemed determined to inflict further wounds upon his house. His father and brother were dead, murdered by a deranged king driven by incestuous desires. His sister had been abducted, and if what Robert claimed was true, subjected to unspeakable horrors. The thought was a blade to Ned's heart, fueling a silent vow to rescue Lyanna or die trying. As Eddard Stark adjusted his position in the saddle, he glanced at the man riding beside him, Lord Hoster Tully, whose auburn hair was a stark contrast to his grim expression. Lady Catelyn Tully, once betrothed to his brother Brandon and now pledged to Eddard himself, represented yet another burden of duty he had inherited undeservedly. The suggestion of taking his brother's place at Lady Catelyn's side had initially ignited Eddard's anger. He saw it as a slight to Brandon's memory, a move that was both callous and dishonorable. Yet, it was Jon Arryn who eventually swayed him, pointing out the practicality of such a union for the Lord of Winterfell and the plight of Lady Catelyn, who risked being forever shadowed by her association with Brandon. Reluctantly, Eddard had conceded, embracing duty over desire, a path all too familiar in the stark landscape of his life. Eddard's sense of duty was ingrained, a stark trait he clung to, even more so after his family's tragedy. Now, as Lord of Winterfell, that duty guided him through his grief and anger. It was a heavy burden, but he was determined not to fail his family, whether they were with him or not. Surveying the assembled northern lords, Eddard felt the weight of their expectations. Lords Umber, Karstark, and Glover, once mere figures in the background of his youth, now looked to him for leadership. Their respect was a mantle he had inherited alongside his title, one forged in the shared fire of anger for the injustices committed by the Mad King. With the host was also Sir Denys Arryn, a reminder that the Starks were not the only family to suffer at the hands of Aerys Targaryen. Sir Denys' cousin, Sir Elbert, had met a grim fate similar to Eddard's brother, igniting the Vale's wrath. The execution of these noble sons, following Lord Jon Arryn's defiance of the king's unjust demands, had set the realm ablaze. Eddard remembered both Arryns fondly, despite the age gap that had separated them. Sir Elbert's death added another layer to his sorrow, yet it was a sorrow shared by many in their coalition. Sir Denys, once the jovial darling of the Vale, now bore a somber countenance, his usual smile replaced by a steely resolve. Behind them, the formidable force of Rivermen, Valormen, and Northmen marched in unity, a collective stand against Targaryen rule. The knights from the Vale, distinguished by their striking blue armor, led the way, followed closely by the infantry from the Riverlands and the north, clad in simpler hues but equally determined, armed with spears and swords freshly forged in the Vale. This coalition, bolstered by levies from all three regions and a number of freeriders who had joined along the way, amassed a total strength of 30,000 men. The Northmen, forming the bulk of this force, granted Ned a significant degree of influence, though he seldom sought to wield it. The alliance thankfully suffered little from the internal strife that often plagued such diverse gatherings of men in the past. Eddard's hand rested on the hilt of his sword as they approached the crest of the final hill, beyond which lay Stony Sept, still a league or two distant but soon to be within their sight. The intelligence they had was that Robert, after the disheartening defeat at Ashford, had found refuge within the walls of this Riverlands town, wounded but shielded by those sympathetic to his cause. This information had spread not just among the rebels but had also reached King's Landing, catching the attention of the Hand of the King, John Connington. A staunch supporter of Prince Rhaegar, Connington's loyalty was unshakable, leading him to personally command the royal forces that had mustered in the capital barely a moon past. By the rebels' reckoning, this force was formidable, though it fell short of their own numbers. This had been a cause for muted celebration at their last war council. Yet, Eddard held his joy in check. While the numerical upper hand was theirs, he knew well that battles were not decided by numbers alone. Courage, after all, often faltered in the face of mortality. As they crested the hill, Eddard's keen grey eyes surveyed the landscape before him. The town of Stony Sept, which might have seemed peaceful in another life, now loomed ominously, swathed in a stark contrast of black and red banners marking the presence of Targaryen forces. A contingent of royal troops was positioned between the rebels and the town, a clear sign their advance hadn't gone unnoticed. With 30,000 men marching openly, stealth had been an impossible luxury. "My riders will scatter them swiftly," Sir Denys declared, cutting through the tense air. Eddard and Lord Hoster exchanged a quick glance, an unspoken understanding passing between them, before Lord Hoster nodded to the Arryn Knight. "The Knights of the Vale shall lead," Lord Hoster decided, his voice carrying the weight of his experience. "Beware the enemy's forward units. Our primary goal is to find and secure Lord Robert before Connington can lay hands on him. If he captures Lord Baratheon, our task becomes significantly harder," he cautioned, the gravity of the situation clear in his tone. Sir Dennis accepted the charge with a solemn nod, though a flicker of determination shone in his eyes. "Just make sure you don't fall too far behind," he quipped with a lightness that belied the gravity of the moment. "It wouldn't be fair for the Vale to claim all the glory." Eddard, ever the stoic, offered a terse nod in response. "We'll be right behind you. Just ensure Robert remains free until then." With that, Sir Dennis turned his horse, gathering a group of Vale lords nearby, preparing to lead the charge. "Remember, Eddard, our spars at the Eyrie should leave you with no doubt of my prowess," Sir Dennis called back, a hint of jest in his voice as he rode off to join his men. Eddard remained silent, watching him go. He respected Sir Dennis' skill with the blade, yet he knew well that personal prowess offered no guarantees in the chaos of battle. History was littered with tales of valiant warriors cut down by the simplest of soldiers. Today, they would all be tested, and Eddard could only hope they were ready. "What are your orders, my lord?" boomed the deep voice of Great John Umber, his stature imposing as ever. With his father, Lord Brandon bedridden, it fell to Great John, the heir to House Umber, to lead their men into battle. Even mounted beside him, Eddard couldn't help but marvel at the sheer size of the man, wondering how recent that famed Umber giant blood was in the Umber line. Eddard's attention then turned to the other northern lords assembled with him. Lord Elise Hornwood stood resolutely, his alliance with Lord Wyman Manderley evident in their close proximity. Eddard recalled his father's mixed feelings about their union years back, a rare instance of northern politicking. Lord Wyman, known for his shrewdness, stood out not just for his considerable girth but also for his political acumen, always walking the line of ambition without overstepping. Lord Rickard Carstark, a kinsman to House Stark, exuded a quiet intensity, his eyes betraying the weight of his responsibilities. And then there was Lord Roose Bolton, his demeanour inscrutable, his gaze devoid of emotion, a stark contrast to the fervour of the other lords present. Lord Wyman Manderley strongly advocated the inclusion of Lord Elise among House Stark's key councillors. The absence of significant figures from Houses Glover, Dustin, and Risewell prompted the suggestion to fill their absence with Lord Hornwood. Eddard saw merit in this reasoning. He recognised Lord Wyman's intent to ensure a sympathetic voice in the council, yet he also understood that wartime was not the occasion for disputes over council composition. While Lord Elise might not have been a master strategist, his insightful contributions had proven valuable, making Eddard appreciative of his presence. Eddard addressed his gathered vassals, the air punctuated by the restless sounds of their horses. Nearby, Vale lords and their commanders barked orders, readying their forces. "Sir Dennis will spearhead our efforts with his cavalry, rushing into the town to secure Robert before the Royalists can," Eddard outlined, his vassals nodding in agreement, their confidence buoyed by their superior numbers and high morale. "We'll leave our supplies here under a small guard, then proceed in battle formation to support our vanguard as swiftly as possible." Turning his focus to logistics and strategy, Eddard continued, "Lord Wyman, you'll command the rearguard. Keep vigilant for any approaching forces, Baratheon, Tyrell, or Lannister, and report any movement immediately." "Understood, my lord," Lord Wyman responded, his reply marked by a deferential tone. Eddard acknowledged him with a nod, satisfied with Manderley's compliance. "Leave a contingent of no more than 1,000 men, Lord Manderley," Eddard specified as Lord Wyman took his leave from the hasty council. He then addressed the rest. "We will not face a pitched battle, and since we'll be spread out in the town, maintain strict control over your men. Absolutely no looting, these are Lord Tully's lands. Anyone found breaking this command will be hung." "I hope to see all of you return in victory," Eddard stated, his eyes moving deliberately among the assembled lords, imbuing his words with earnest hope. Their faces mirrored back a blend of respect and resolve, each silently committing to stand firm in the face of the impending battle. As Eddard's gaze met Lord Roose Bolton's pallid stare, a chill brushed against his resolve, reminding him of the bygone days of strife between their houses. He was silently grateful those times of open conflict were behind them. "The gods are with us in our vengeance, let us kill some sister fuckers." Great John Umber's voice once again boomed. His words ignited a fervor among the assembled lords and warriors. A resounding cheer erupted. With spirits lifted and determination burning bright, they dispersed, each man turning to his preparations, preparing for the battle ahead. Eddard's gaze followed the Vale cavalry, a blur of blue disappearing into the distance toward the stony sept, leaving behind a trail of swirling dust. As they vanished, he steeled himself for the impending battle, memories of past swordplay lessons and tactical strategies flickering through his mind. Yet, he knew all too well that the chaos of battle would render much of his preparation irrelevant, relying instead on instinct and the muscle memory ingrained from years of training. The clash between the charging cavalry and the defending Targaryen forces sent a palpable surge of tension coursing through him. Even at a distance, he could feel the adrenaline pumping through his veins, a testament to the gravity of the impending battle. His Northmen stood resolute, a disciplined and unified force unlike the Rivermen, whose allegiance seemed scattered among their individual lords, each with their own agenda under the loose banner of House Tully. Eddard had strategically placed his most powerful lords to command his forces, ensuring cohesion and loyalty. Though each lord retained loyalty to their respective houses, there was an absence of antagonism among them, unlike the discord he observed among the Riverlords. As he observed the fiery exchange between the red-clad Blackwoods and the yellow-cloaked Brackens, Eddard couldn't ignore the stark contrast between their discord and the unity of his own forces. Despite the simmering tensions and grievances over his family's troubles, his men stood united, fueled by a shared sense of outrage at what they perceived as a stain on the North's honor. The prospect of seeking revenge and justice stirred an unyielding determination within them. To Eddard's knowledge, House Stark had not ventured south and fought since the young dragon's conquest of Dorne over a century ago, the northern nobility refusing to be entangled in the South's deadly and treacherous uprisings and political plays. Yet, the fervent support and unwavering loyalty of the Northmen in response to his family's adversity touched him deeply, humbling him in unexpected ways. Determined to reciprocate this loyalty and support, Eddard resolved to do everything in his power to repay their faith and ensure that justice was served, not just for his family, but for the honor of the North. Anticipation hummed through their ranks, a sharp contrast to their usual raucousness. Though known for their wild spirit, Northmen had forged a formidable unity, especially in times of hardship, be it on the battlefield or huddling together for warmth in the unforgiving grip of winter. The mixed feelings of excitement and apprehension grew as the distant sounds of battle and bells tolling reached them. His lords dispersed with their contingents, pouring into the town to overwhelm the Targaryens quickly. The initial confrontation had been fierce, the Vale Knights breaking through the royalist line, leaving a trail of casualties from both sides in their wake. The vanguard, though formidable, couldn't prevail against the royalists alone. As Eddard guided his men between the houses of the Stony Sept, he witnessed Vale contingents being pushed back by a disciplined hedgehog formation of Targaryen spears. Among them, knights led by a Waynwood, if Eddard's memory served him right, cheered at the sight of northern banners. The royalists paused as the knights made way for Eddard's infantry to engage the Targaryen spearmen. Clashes of steel, cries, and battle roars erupted as the two forces collided. Eddard rode alongside the Waynwood knight, their swords flashing as they maneuvered around the chaotic melee to strike the spearmen from the flank. Eddard's blade found its mark with deadly precision, inflicting grievous wounds upon the lightly armored opponents caught between two forces. The Targaryen spears soon began avoiding him and his blade, breaking formation only to get cut down by his infantry. The Targaryen spearmen soon broke ranks, fleeing back into the town. Some Vale knights moved to pursue, but Eddard gestured for restraint through the Waynwood knight. The battle was far from over, and straying too far from the infantry would risk exposing the cavalry. As they pressed further into the town, the prominent sept after which it was named after loomed larger in the distance. The sounds of fighting echoed from the rooftops around them, mingling with the worried gazes of small folk peering from windows. Suddenly, a commotion echoed from a narrow alleyway leading to the town square. Eddard wheeled his horse around to see a lone rider, garbed in the purple colors of Belmore, racing toward them. His urgency was evident, and Eddard knew this news was vital. "My lord," the rider shouted as he drew nearer. "Sir Dennis has fallen to Lord Connington's hand. We need reinforcements at the town square at once." Eddard's command cut through the tension, uniting the men of the north and the Vale with a single, determined purpose. "To the town square. We rally to our allies' side." A resounding cheer erupted among the men, their spirits lifted by the call to action. They swiftly began advancing, some jogging forward while others urged their horses into a trot. The rider from Belmore fell in line with the other Vale knights, his urgent message propelling them onward. Turning to the Waynwood knight, whom he recognized as the highest-ranking noble among the contingent of knights, Eddard sought clarity on the chain of command in the absence of Sir Dennis. "Who would assume command in Sir Dennis's absence, sir?" Eddard inquired, emphasizing the need for a clear successor to prevent confusion or disarray. "I am Sir Morton Waynwood, my lord," the knight replied, his voice shaky because of the situation's urgency. "In Sir Dennis' absence, I believe either Lord Jon Royce or Lord Benedar Belmore would be the natural choices. Given the rider and circumstances, I would lean toward Lord Benedar, although Lord Jon's military experience is substantial, as you may know." "Very well, Sir Morton. Let's hope the gods are with us today," Eddard said, his tone appreciative of the knight's input. With a nod of mutual respect, Sir Morton kicked his horse into a quicker pace to catch up with the vanguard, while Eddard turned his focus back to the task at hand. The skirmish they had just left was merely the opening act, the true test awaited them in the heart of the town. The Sept towered over them as they emerged into the expansive cobbled square, now a tapestry of chaos and carnage. Without hesitation, Eddard directed his men, dispersing them into strategic units to engage the densest clusters of Targaryen fighters. With a select group by his side, Eddard navigated through the tumult towards a fiercely contested area, marked by the fluttering banners of House Tully. Among the fray, a figure adorned with the unmistakable sigil of a griffin fought valiantly. Nearby, a figure in silver-scaled armor lay prone, the auburn hair identifying the fallen warrior as Lord Tully. Eddard and his forces pushed forward toward Lord Connington and the injured Lord Tully, moving quickly through the chaos. Catching Connington's attention, who then quickly glanced at Lord Tully before signaling a retreat. The sound of horns filled the air as the Targaryen troops started pulling back, moving away from the fight under their commander's orders. Eddard, now mere yards from Connington, found his advance stymied by the thickening crowd of retreating enemies. His pragmatic part weighed the merits of pursuing a beaten foe against the immediate need to attend to Lord Hoster Tully. The sight of Connington mounting a horse and fleeing the square with his remaining men cemented Eddard's decision. The Targaryen rearguard formed a stalwart shield wall, halting the Stark and Tully forces, a final stand to ensure their lord's escape. Despite the losses among the Targaryen defenders, it was clear Lord Connington would manage to escape. Resigning to the turn of events, Eddard shifted his focus to the wounded Lord Tully, understanding that the day's battle, while not ending in the capture of the king's hand, had nonetheless tilted the war's momentum. It did not seem like Connington ever got his hands on Robert, so Eddard would hope that the Baratheon either had managed to escape the town or would get out of his hiding spot now. Eddard directed his gaze toward Lord Hoster, who lay motionless, shielded by his loyal men-at-arms. The Tully soldiers respectfully made way for Eddard as he neared. "Take him to the Sept," he instructed firmly. "We'll call for healers to attend to him immediately." Acknowledging his order, the Tully soldiers nodded and carefully began to move their lord to the safety of the Sept, following Eddard's directive with urgency. In the aftermath, with both Lord Tully and Sir Dennis out of the picture, command of the allied forces naturally fell to Eddard. He was contemplating his next steps when a familiar voice cut through the noise. Amidst the enthusiastic cheers of victory, a familiar voice called out, drawing Eddard's attention. "Ned." It was Robert, making his way toward him, his figure bearing the scars of combat, blood staining his tunic. Without hesitation, Eddard dismounted, meeting his friend. Robert's grip on his war hammer was slick with blood, evidence of the fierce struggle. "We've struck a blow against the Targaryens today, Ned," Robert declared, gesturing to the carnage surrounding them. Lord Tarley caught me at Ashford, but this, he motioned broadly, has turned the tide back in our favour. You're wounded, Robert. You should see a maester immediately, Eddard urged, his concern palpable as he surveyed Robert's torn attire and injuries. Robert waved off Eddard's concern with a hearty laugh. I'll be fine, Ned. A maester can tend to me later. Most of this blood isn't mine anyway, he said nonchalantly, though a hint of discomfort flickered across his features as he adjusted his grip on the hammer. Those damned Targaryen dogs will think twice now before trying to meet us in battle now. Robert continued, a large smile shining from the young lord's now unruly beard, usually quite well maintained. It was obvious that Robert had not been in the best situation after Ashford. Eddard regarded his friend skeptically but ultimately relented, trusting that if Robert's injuries were severe, he would have already collapsed. Turning his attention to the pressing matter at hand, Eddard cut straight to the chase. What news from the Stormlands, Robert? Robert's playful demeanor softened as he rolled his eyes in jest. Always the serious one, Stark. You Northerners have little patience for the art of banter, he quipped before adopting a more somber tone. I managed to escape from Ashford despite my wounds, escorted here by a loyal contingent of my men-at-arms. Fortunately, our losses were not as dire as they could have been. Robert puffed his chest a little. Although our host may lack cohesion, many lords still hold sizable forces ready to answer my call. I've already received word from Lord Dundarian and Lord Estamont that they are en route to join us, eager to rally to our cause. Unfortunately, they were too distant and too few to engage with Connington and the Targaryens here. Eddard nods hesitantly as he muddles over the information. The defeat at Ashford wasn't ideal for their cause, but it was nothing close to decisive, and with many Stormlords still in command it seemed like the situation would be salvageable, in time though. Then, pressing our luck now would be folly, Eddard observed as they made their way toward the Sept, where the remaining lords and knights seemed to have congregated. We should pull back to River Run. With Jon without heirs that we know of, he needs to strategize his next move. Do you have confidence in Storm's End's defenses? Robert appeared genuinely taken aback by the question. Against Mace Tyrell? I'd sooner torch Storm's End myself than see it fall to him. My brothers would sooner eat the castle's dirt than let Tyrell breach its walls. How long could they hold then? Eddard inquired, his concern evident. He knew it mattered little if Robert was determined to defend the castle if he wasn't present, and he feared he knew little about the capabilities of the other Baratheon brothers. Robert's expression tightened with discomfort. I can't recall precisely, but under optimal conditions, we could sustain a defense for over a year with the castle fully stocked. Eddard arched an eyebrow. Considering we've just emerged from winter, it's reasonable to assume the stocks are not at their peak? Robert shook his head firmly. They should hold out for over half a year at least. If my Castellan didn't see fit to inform me of any dire circumstances when I was there, then it's unlikely the situation is as grave as it seems. Despite Robert's attempt to reassure them both, Eddard couldn't shake the sense of unease. Lord Tyrell's encirclement of Storm's End likely left little room for optimism. Acknowledging Lord Mace Tyrell's weakness in martial matters, Eddard turned his attention to a more concerning figure. But what about Lord Tarley? Your garrison numbers what, a mere 200 to 300 men? Robert's laughter boomed in response. As if Mace Tyrell would ever grant Lord Tarley such authority. The day that happens is the day the White Walkers march on King's Landing. Eddard remained solemn as Robert continued, unless the Mad King himself intervenes, I don't foresee our situation changing. Eddard hoped fervently that Robert's confidence wasn't misplaced. The fall of Storm's End and the capture of Robert's brothers would be a devastating blow to their cause. Though he doubted Robert would hastily seek peace, the loss would undoubtedly weaken their position significantly. The capital's sky hung in unending grey, mirroring the subdued mood of its people. But amidst it all, the small folk hadn't lost hope or faith in their protectors. Christopher and his mounted men moved through the crowds, earning nods of respect and shouted greetings. Robin kept Christopher informed about public opinion in the capital, and his intel proved spot on. Christopher's knack for breaking down criminal rings in the northern parts of the city had earned him and his crew admiration. Despite being just a captain, Christopher had managed to carve out a significant role for himself. He and his men were given the freedom to chase criminals wherever they lurked, often stepping on the toes of other captains. This stirred up mixed feelings among his peers. Some of the newly appointed captains appreciated the assistance, recognizing Christopher's men as experienced and efficient in their operations. Ironically, these were often the very captains handpicked by their commander. However, among the seasoned veterans whom Sir Arnold had failed to replace, there was less enthusiasm. Pride clouded their judgment, struggling to comprehend why they should cede the limelight to Christopher. In a way, their criticism held merit, though it was tinged with envy and bruised egos. Under Christopher's direct jurisdiction, his name and reputation had become nearly household knowledge. While he might not have been on the lips of oblivious lords in the Red Keep, the influential players were well aware of his rise. This reputation led to the current situation where a captain had requested assistance from the square beneath the Great September. A runner had been dispatched to Christopher, reporting that disgruntled smallfolk had begun rioting against the gold cloaks stationed there, painting a picture of a volatile situation. Christopher observed the mass of moving smallfolk as they neared the square. Though it didn't appear completely out of control, tempers were clearly on the rise. His second-in-command brought his horse closer, asking, "How shall we proceed, Captain?" Christopher's lieutenant, a man by the name of Brian, had caught Adam's attention and passed Robin's thorough background checks. Despite some murmurs of discontent about his rapid rise to prominence, Brian proved himself capable and fiercely loyal. Christopher suspected that Brian's loyalty ran deeper than mere allegiance to his title of captain. Christopher slowed his mount to a halt as they emerged onto the road leading to the square. Surveying the area, his gaze settled on the stairs ascending to the Great September high ground would be crucial for both maintaining awareness and, in the worst-case scenario, securing a strategic advantage in combat. Most of the small folk clustered in the heart of the Great Square, with a few attempting to ascend the steps toward Baylor's September. Christopher easily spotted the gold cloaks amidst the sea of red, blue, and green tunics, their distinct cloaks making them stand out. Scattered in small groups, some appeared overwhelmed, brandishing cudgels at any who ventured too close. Christopher gestured towards the isolated gold cloaks, though he was certain his second-in-command had already noticed them. The groups of guards looked like patches in a quilt, surrounded by a throng of smallfolk. "Take a few dozen men and lead those groups up to the stairs leading to Baylor's. I'll station myself there and wait," Christopher commanded, briefly halting his lieutenant as a thought struck him. "Oh, and try to locate Captain Riesling. It would be ill-fitting if he met his end at the hands of discontented smallfolk." "Of course, Captain," the lieutenant replied, a smirk fleeting across his face before vanishing. "You five, stay. The rest, follow me," he directed, before guiding his men into the dispersing crowd. Christopher's remaining 5 men flanked him as they ascended the steps, navigating around the throng and issuing commands to clear their path. As they reached the top, Christopher surveyed the assembly below. He immediately spotted his mounted men leading a contingent of gold cloaks towards him. Though the guards still seemed unsettled, there was a palpable sense of relief at the sight of reinforcements, and they appeared to have regained some semblance of discipline. Brian's horse gracefully ascended the steps, bringing him alongside Christopher as the men they had rescued formed a protective barrier at the foot of the stairs, lining up in 2-man deep rows to shield the entire width of the ascent. With a subtle nod of his head, Brian indicated towards a gold cloak clad in black officer's armor, adorned with the 4 golden discs denoting the rank of captain. "Captain Riesling for you, sir," Brian announced as the young captain approached. Riesling appeared slight and inexperienced, with a small moustache as his only defining feature, typical of many of Sir Arnold's recent appointees. Christopher had conducted his due diligence on the other captains of the watch, but the name Riesling had never crossed his path until now. Apparently hailing from a vassal house of the Forsaways of Cider Hall, House Riesling's significance had eluded Christopher's attention. He cared little for the politics of the minor lords of the Reach, and why Sir Arnold Merryweather had chosen a member of that house as a captain remained a mystery to him. Reynard Riesling's face, whether from fatigue or embarrassment, was flushed with relief as he bowed deeply to Christopher. "Oh, Captain Mudd, the Father has answered my prayers. I shudder to think what would have happened if not for your timely arrival," the man exclaimed dramatically, his moustache twitching. Christopher managed to maintain a stern expression, though he shot a lightning-quick glance toward Brian, who seemed torn between amusement and a desire to teach the pathetic captain a lesson. "Well, Captain Riesling, your runner is to thank for this. I simply arrived as soon as I could," Christopher replied, cutting short the Reachman's dramatic display. "We'll have our mounted men split the crowd and then walk in with the foot, either dispersing the small folk or apprehending the troublemakers." Brian nodded in agreement, and though Captain Riesling looked as if he wanted to protest, a sharp look from Christopher dissuaded him. "Ensure that the arresting gold cloaks are not disturbed, and lead the prisoners up to the September. Make use of Baylor's dungeons until further notice," Christopher instructed, not waiting for a response as he turned his horse away from the two officers. Brian promptly set about carrying out the orders. Christopher observed as his mounted gold cloaks began to separate and isolate groups of small folk, swiftly joined by Captain Riesling's men. The majority of the small folk chose to retreat as soon as the gold cloaks approached, though some tested the resolve of his men with defiant protests. The screams of the apprehended agitated a few in the main crowd, but his mounted men adeptly maintained separation. Only a fool would attempt to slip past the blockade, as the mounts were not averse to trampling anyone who made them nervous. After all, the horses had been specifically trained to handle such volatile situations. The process continued for another hour or two, with Christopher silently observing as small folk troublemakers were led past him into the sept, where the septons, albeit hesitant, directed his men to the dungeons with the captives. The situation finally came to a close as 200 gold cloaks reinforced them from the Red Keep. Christopher showed none of the irritation he felt at the reinforcements' tardiness as he thanked the officers leading them. These lieutenants were directly under Sir Arnold Merryweather and evidently his confidants, given their competence. Christopher could speculate why Sir Arnold hadn't led them himself. It seemed that any attention drawn to the Merryweather commander was unfavorable, especially after the cleansing of Merryweather men in the capital following the Hand's exile. Sir Arnold remained in his position due to the upheaval after Lord Connington's defeat at the Stony Sept and subsequent exile. It appeared that the king's new hand, Lord Carlton Chelsted, had other priorities than sorting out the mess in the Gold Cloak's leadership. Or perhaps the Hand wasn't even aware of it. From what Christopher had gathered, Lord Carlton was not a decisive man, more akin to a craven cockroach. He had, after all, managed to survive as King Ares Master of Coin for years. Alongside him stood Lord Simmons Staunton, another apparent yes-man in the king's court. Both were simple crown lords, and it was evident that the two leeches had simply attached themselves to the most powerful person in the area, namely the king. Merryweather's lieutenants soon interrupted his thoughts, beginning to coordinate the transfer of the arrested protesters to the Red Keep's dungeons. Christopher kept his interaction with them as brief as possible, delegating the mundane task to their capable hands. Just as Christopher was about to locate Brian and depart for his own barracks, he spotted a mounted Targaryen soldier approaching him with great haste from the direction of the Red Keep. Brian materialized at Christopher's side as the rider arrived. "Captain Mudd?" the rider asked, and Christopher nodded in affirmation. In turn, the rider nodded. "Prince Rhaegar requests your presence at the Red Keep as soon as it is convenient." Christopher made a feeble attempt to hide his surprise as the rider's words registered in his mind. Prince Rhaegar had returned. Christopher had nearly forgotten that his patron was even involved in any capacity amidst the chaos of war. While he had never believed any rumors of the prince's demise, he had assumed that Rhaegar had fled with his Stark girl to Essos to begin anew or something of the like. "I see," Christopher replied simply, sharing a look with Brian, who appeared just as surprised as him. After a moment, he shook his head. "Very well, Brian, take the men back to the barracks. I will join the prince immediately. Brian's professionalism took over as he nodded in acquiescence and turned his mount towards their men, who were waiting patiently to the side as the regular gold cloaks passed back and forth. Christopher turned back towards the rider and gestured towards the descending steps and square. Lead the way. The Targaryen soldier nodded, turning his horse around with a tug of the reins, and began the descent. Christopher followed, though his thoughts were consumed by other matters. Namely, the return of Prince Rhaegar. King Aerys posed a great disadvantage to the war effort, almost an adversary in his own right due to his instability. Christopher was aware of past plots that had sought to replace Aerys with either Prince Rhaegar or, more recently, the infant Prince Aegon. While Rhaegar's return would undoubtedly bolster the loyalist side, Christopher couldn't shake the feeling that it might be too little, too late. In Aegon's case, who would act as regent? Lord Chelstead was unsuitable, and Princess Elia lacked the military leadership necessary for such a role. However, Prince Rhaegar could be a saving grace. Most felt the winds shifting in the rebels' favor, even if they hadn't capitalized on their victory at the Stony Sept yet. The Loyalists still held numerical superiority, but that relied on the Dornish, who remained entrenched in Dorne, the Reach, which seemed content with a prolonged siege at Storm's End, and the Crown Lords, who had suffered heavy losses at the Stony September. As they ascended Aegon's high hill, with the Red Keep standing proudly at its summit and Blackwater Bay behind it, Christopher's gaze lingered on the 7 great drum towers rising above the tall curtain walls. Further back, he spied the square fortress of Maegor's Holdfast, the castle's most defensible structure. They soon passed through the open gates that led through the initial curtain walls, with the gold cloaks on guard simply giving them a nod in greeting as they entered. Dismounting from their horses, they handed the reins to a couple of stable hands who had rushed to greet them. The rider then led Christopher past a sprawling courtyard and into the central keep. They navigated through the pale red corridors, with servants stopping to curtsy as they made their way. Finally, they arrived at a decorated oak door, guarded by a white-cloaked knight standing sentinel. Christopher recognized Sir Oswell went from the tourney that now felt like a distant memory. The knight nodded in greeting towards Christopher but remained otherwise silent as he rapped his knuckles upon the door. A faint enter sounded from within, and Sir Oswell opened the door. The handsome visage of Prince Rhaegar greeted Christopher as he entered the solar, noticing absent-mindedly that the rider slipped out of sight before the Kingsguard knight closed the door. The prince rose to his feet, nodding in greeting with a warm smile and a glint in his violet Valyrian eyes. "Sir Christopher, time and again you have impressed, and most deservedly been rewarded for it." Christopher maintained a level gaze on the prince. The notion of fleeing with a girl only to return months later amidst a rebellion they may have instigated didn't sit well with him. He doubted Rhaegar could offer any satisfactory explanation, not that he would even ask. Attempting to seize both lady and kingdom seemed uncharacteristically greedy and foolish for the prince. Christopher's once-held view of Rhaegar as a complete antithesis to his father had faded since the final joust at Harrenhal. However, it remained a fact that the prince was still infinitely more stable than his father, even considering Rhaegar's escapades with Lyanna Stark. As the war raged on, such nuances mattered less and less. Rhaegar still commanded much admiration from many nobles, and there was hope that he would manage to turn the tide of the war in their favor. Christopher returned the greeting with a brief bow as he approached the desk, and they both settled into their respective seats. Prince Rhaegar continued with a gracious smile. "I am aware, however, that your rise has encountered a final obstacle, and that corruption has stood in your way." Pausing for a moment, Rhaegar's expression grew slightly more serious. "I intend to rectify this. Your impressive service has allowed me to do so without arousing serious suspicion from either my father or his loyal courtiers." It was clear that this would be the most courteous adjective the prince could spare for his father's lackeys. Rhaegar had a way with words, though Christopher knew he wouldn't have been as kind. "With immediate effect, I revoke Sir Arnel Merryweather's position as commander of the City Watch and in turn appoint you, Sir Christopher, as commander," Rhaegar declared. Christopher nodded gratefully. It came as no great surprise, as Sir Arnel had been on his way out for some time now. Nevertheless, it was a gratifying moment to finally reach the top of the gold cloaks after all the hard work that had been put into it, although it hadn't even been 2 years. There is no reason to waste resources upon the man, and I anticipate that you will wipe away any power structure he has in place and remake it in your image. Rhaegar then stated with a pointed look. It was obvious that Rhaegar had at least been updated upon the state of the gold cloaks under Merryweather's leadership. I appreciate the honor you have bestowed upon me, my prince, and promise to make the position my own as you say, Christopher replied with a humble expression upon his features. Prince Rhaegar studied him for a moment before nodding. I have total confidence that you will exceed any expectations I could set. The Targaryen then smiled once more. This has been a productive talk. I shall handle Sir Arnel and let you settle into the commander's chambers here at the Red Keep at your pace. Have a fine evening, Sir Christopher. Christopher stood and, with a modest bow, swiftly turned on his heel to leave the prince's presence. As he passed through the door, Sir Oswell gave him a nod of acknowledgement. Christopher was on the verge of being consumed by his plans for the city watch when he noticed Sir Jaime Lannister rounding the corner from a nearby corridor. Close behind the Lannister knight was a hunched figure in oversized robes. Despite his poor condition, the identity of King Aerys was unmistakable. The bandages peeking out from the large, open sleeves of his robes only accentuated his frailty. Trailing the king was Prince Lewin Martell, his posture sharp in contrast. Sir Jaime was the only one who seemed to take note of Christopher, giving him a searching look before moving on. Christopher paid little attention to the dismissive Lannister, his gaze instead critically following the king as he passed. Christopher couldn't help but reflect on the king's deteriorating condition. A king's death usually spelled disaster for a wartime effort, but King Aerys seemed to be an exception to the rule. His passing might very well be a relief to the realm, Christopher mused, given the king's increasingly unstable rule. Christopher resolved that the Mad King's reign had to end for the royalists to stand any chance of prevailing in the rebellion. His alliances were shaky at best. The Tyrells were influenced heavily by Prince Rhaegar, and Dorne's ties were through marriage to the prince. It was doubtful the Crown Lords would prefer the erratic rule of the father over the son. For his part, Christopher felt the weight of his situation. Though he might like to believe he could navigate the turmoil and emerge in a better position, he recognized this hinged largely on a royalist victory. Should the rebels win, they would unlikely look kindly on him if he turned cloak now. Rationalizing his position as being caught in the wrong place at the wrong time would do little to sway their judgment. Christopher understood clearly that he could no longer afford to remain passive and cautious if he hoped to gain anything from this war. The conflict seemed to be drawing toward an inevitable conclusion, and he was unsure if the royalists could withstand another defeat. The need for decisive leadership was urgent. Yet, despite the bleak outlook, the royalist lords showed no signs of surrendering to the rebels, a glimmer of hope in an otherwise dire situation. After all, the Targaryen dynasty had been a cornerstone of the Seven Kingdoms for nearly 3 centuries, and its legacy was not easily dismissed. For now, however, Christopher would concentrate on reorganizing the gold cloaks. Commanding a well-equipped and armored force in the continent's largest and most influential city was a formidable asset, one that held significant power even amidst the chaos engulfing the realm outside King's Landing's towering curtain walls. House Mud would not fade into obscurity, merely a footnote in some senile archmeister's history tome.